Hello, and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. A former and possible future president is also now a felon.
Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace.
The impact of President Donald Trump's conviction on the 2024 presidential election and on democracy writ large.
For the sixth consecutive year, I introduced and the legislature passed a balanced budget that invests in our future while putting money back in the hands of hardworking Illinoisans.
Democrats decide how the state will spend $53 billion.
J.B. Pritzker is making good on his campaign promise of making this the most welcoming state for illegal immigrants.
Over the objections of minority party Republicans, what it means for your wallet, for CPS, and for the Bears. And now joining us to talk about all of that is our Week in Review panel, including Rick Pearson from the Chicago Tribune, Michael Liptrot from Southside Weekly, Greg Hines from Crane's Chicago Business, and then via Zoom, thanks for taking the time out, Becky Vivi of Chalkbeat Chicago, that is. So we're going to begin, of course, with this historic news of the conviction of former President Trump. Rick, put this into perspective. How historic is this?
Historic. It's the first president, ex-president, ever to be found guilty of a felony in a criminal prosecution. I mean, you can't understate, but of course, when you look at Donald Trump's resume, twice impeached, you just look at this litany of things, as well as the other three trials that are facing him. But the fact that you really have, for the first time in a courtroom, a jury of our peers has found him guilty of 34 criminal acts.
Now, Michael, there's a lot of chatter about what this might mean for the election. What are your thoughts?
As Trump said, that is what he thinks the real verdict will be. And this has a lot of implications for the election. And overall, when we think about Trump not only facing this case, which has come to a close, but the three other cases that are coming. You have Florida, concealing documents, Georgia, election interference, and then the insurrection from January 6th. So there's a lot to be said about what these cases means, but this conviction is definitely unprecedented and historic when we think about what is to come for the fall.
Greg, to you there, we just heard the president slamming the court, the verdict as well as rigged. You have Republican leaders, it's not just the president, it's really many of the leaders of his party, including the Speaker of the U.S. House, that are also calling this a political persecution, weaponizing of the judiciary. Are there any long-term ramifications beyond Trump?
The ramifications are going to go forever. Trump has changed the political culture in this country in any number of ways. I thought the most telling remarks in the whole trial were when, after the prosecution contended there was this conspiracy to cover this up this affair to get him elected, his attorney got up and literally said, well, all campaigns are conspiracies. And you know, lots of people go out and buy off witnesses and to keep bad publicity from getting out there. I mean, that's kind of the Trumpian view of the world, that, you know, it's all crooked, it's all evil, it's all in the takes. You can go and do whatever you want. And we're so tribalized in this country now, is in part because of where Trump has pushed things and how he's campaigned, that, you know, nobody talks to anybody anymore. It's really bad.
Well, and that's where the Republican Party is, too. As I mean, he is their presumptive Republican presidential nominee. So for Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, for Mitch McConnell, he is the horse for the Republican Party. And so they're going to adopt all of the same lines, the rigged trial, the witch hunt, all of that stuff. You look at it on that level, then you look at, in just the day since the guilty pleas were announced, and Trump's campaign says it's raised $35 million in small dollar donations. So that's a pretty imposing
It's a message
figure.
that's resonating.
Yes.
So, Becky, I want to bring you into this conversation. Just, do you have anything to add in terms of either impact on the election, or I guess also I'm interested in this notion because I think we are so polarized that there are some folks who were literally toasting champagne to this verdict and others that are hanging their flags upside down because they believe that this is truly an attack and a conspiracy against former President Trump.
Well, I think the ruling itself doesn't change the polarization of the country. I do think what will be very interesting and is also very unprecedented is what will happen when his sentencing occurs, which is, a week before the Republican National Convention is set to take place. He will be sentenced in a courtroom. And I think from a more broad perspective, I think we have to ask the question of how do we want the leaders of our institutions in America, in our local governments, how do we want them to act? How do we want them to be? And I think the interactions with the justice system have huge ramifications, like Greg said, that will kind of play out for many years. And again, with this sentencing, I mean, the big question I have is, what if his sentence requires him to serve time when he's supposed to, let's say he does win the election, and when he's supposed to office? I think there are a lot of big questions facing our country as it relates to justice and again, what is right and wrong.
So to that end, I admit it, we just played these calls from Trump characterizing this as really a kangaroo court. And Greg, I wonder does the responsibility fall at all in the media to watch the context in which we continue to play that? Because as I was watching, for example, I heard more of Trump being against what was said by what the jury's verdict was than the case itself.
It's a really good question, and it points to a real dilemma we have. I'm still kind of taken back when Trump will say something which is clearly inaccurate or wrong, and the reporter will immediately say, well, of course, that's a lie. That's not true. What? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we weren't taught to govern with a situation like that. But like I said, there are no rules anymore. That's one of the changes that Trump has brought about in politics. You can say whatever you want, you can demonize whatever you want, and how the media covers that without becoming polarized itself is a very difficult line to walk, and it's very easy to fall off one side or the other.
You walking that line, Michael?
Well, Greg, I have to piggyback on what you're saying because Trump is definitely using the media when it comes to the aftermath of this verdict. And looking at even his comments after the verdict, that I was more shocked but not surprised that it even happened. When I was looking at the coverage and you see Trump walking out of the courtroom, I'm thinking, oh, he's about to go to his car. Then you see him stop, address the cameras, and then go into this speech really emboldening his base. And he knows his base very well. He knows what can galvanize them and spin any situation into this is against me, therefore this is against America, therefore this is against your liberties.
And then we play it ad nauseum.
Well, his hallmark is tearing down institutions, and the one institution that is awaiting the teardown is now the judicial system.
Well, so let's go back and stick there for a minute because we also have, of course, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, who is refused to recuse himself from cases involving the January 6th attack on the Capitol. What does that say about our branches of government and trust in that third branch?
Well, I think the Supreme Court faces some very serious trust issues with the public. And I know Dick Durbin, as head of Senate Judiciary, for years has tried to get the Supreme Court to enact its own kind of code of conduct. But we also believed, 20 years ago, that for the most part, yes, there was always politics involved, but we believe for the most part they were truly honorable people looking above the regular fray of politics to decide on a countrywide basis.
Now you assume the other party is just a jerk. They're wrong.
Well, and now it's now come into that. I mean, you could say the big example of that was Bush v. Gore, for example, and that kind of sent everything kind of cascading into how politics has just permeated everything, and there is no trust factor.
And Rick, I'm going to stick with you because Illinois Republicans went all in for Trump last weekend. There was a state GOP convention in Collinsville. You were there. This is a different Illinois Republican Party, too.
Oh, well, it's very much, and I think it's very much a reflection, too, of, what is the Republican Party in Illinois? The fact that here they met in Collinsville in southwestern Illinois, just outside St. Louis, which is basically all the red counties in Illinois, run south past Springfield downstate. Used to be fertile Democratic territory, Union territory, moderate Democrats.
Not anymore.
There's very few of them that exist down there. And so, yes, they have their big convention. They adopt these platform positions that are totally in line with what the Trump Republican platform is, as well as the fact that for the Milwaukee Illinois delegation of the convention, they pick Mary Miller, who is a member of the Freedom Caucus, the most extreme right member of the three Republicans that are left in the 17-member congressional delegation. But she has been totally a Trump acolyte the entire time. And again, being a member of the Freedom Caucus tells you about where her leadership is.
Now, let's move over to the Democratic Party, because we've got school out, Memorial Day over. That means summer is here, and the Democratic National Convention will be hosted in Chicago sooner than we know it. And Greg, we've got some concerns about CPD's preparations.
Yeah, the city's inspector general released a report suggesting that the police department really hasn't done the kind of preparations to deal with mass events that they ought to be. That indeed is troubling. Meaning, we're all asking the same questions. There's going to be 1968 redux. We all know there's going to be huge demonstrations unless something miraculous happens in Gaza and Israel and the whole thing is settled. It's going to be big demonstrations. The mayor is the head of the police department, which has got to protect the public's right to speak, but also protect the safety of the delegates. But yet the mayor himself is a little bit of a bomb thrower. He came out of this as an organizer. How is he going to come down? This is very much an act in progress. Don't know how it's going to turn out. Could be very bad. We'll see. Hope not.
We will all be there.
There was supposed to be all of this training going on, and I think that was
and
one of the
Superintendent
things.
Snelling says it is.
And right. On constitutional awareness and those kinds of issues. But that report kind of pretty much said it's a lot of talking right now.
Especially thinking about coming out of 2020. And the need for progress that was highlighted in the protests following the death of George Floyd. And when we think about kettling, where CPD encircled protesters and
CPD now saying that those are two different terms, right?
Right.
Kettling versus encircling. Can you explain?
So, and essentially, encircling, Superintendent Snelling is saying, is going to be used when CPD is going to, for sure, with probable cause, arrest all members or protesters who are being encircled. And he is asserting this as a distinction from kettling, which was highly controversial back in 2020.
Sort of more of a mass roundup without pinpointing individuals.
Right, when they showed up to a protest, and essentially when you think about a paddy wagon situation where the police show up and just take everyone. And Snelling is now asserting that encircling is going to be used when the CPD has probable cause for everyone who's being encircled.
Michael, do you think that the public, or particularly protesters, are going to see that distinguishment?
I think if you're in a crowd and you notice that police are surrounding you, it's going to look the same for a lot of people, just to be surrounded.
So many eyes on Chicago. And Michael, let's stick with you as well, because there are some changes to when there is an allegation of misconduct by a Chicago police officer. Some of this information is now going to be made public?
Yes. So through efforts by the Community Commission for Public Accountability, police misconduct through the Bureau of Internal Affairs, those records are going to be now public. And this, hopefully, they're hoping that this could just shine a light on the judgment and the process behind these police misconduct allegations, especially in this past year, where you saw the shooting of Dexter Reed, when you saw a migrant teen allegedly getting impregnated by a CPD officer. That trust. And when we think about the relationship between community and police, especially following the death of George Floyd in 2020, the need for healing there. And
so this might be seen as progress?
That is yet to be determined. And so the effort being put there towards healing by making these records public.
Before we move on from the DNC, there was news that Chicago is not going to be where the big roll call occurs. Becky, are conventions a relic of the past if they can just do this virtually? I ask you as you're virtual. Yeah.
Yes. I actually wrote a story in 2020 about the conventions because they were virtual at the time with COVID. And I talked to a number of people, both in the party and other experts, political observers. And really, the conventions are now meant to be a bit of a rallying to get out the vote, energize the base, energize the party to go out and do the final push to get voters to the poll kind of an event. Not so much about the procedure of nominating the candidate. A lot of that is done beforehand, and all of the procedural stuff is sort of pomp and circumstance at the event. And so I think that has been a movement that both parties have made over time, and certainly in 2020 allowed them to, do what they did. I think they had something in, the car drive to, again, get out the vote as the final months of the election.
In Chicago, we'll surely have plenty of parties quickly, Greg, yeah.
That having been said, I agree with you, but you can still have surprises at conventions. I remember the emergence of Sarah Palin, for instance, at John McCain's convention. That would kind of signaled the great rightward move of the Republican Party. She was very much a predecessor of Donald Trump. So, yeah, they're big commercials, but you're still talking 2,000, 3,000 human beings in a room. Strange stuff can happen.
A lot can happen, especially with the state delegations, and this whole hosting is a feather in the cap of the governor. And speaking of him, Pritzker says that he is going to sign a budget that the legislature passed early, and I do mean at like 4:44, I believe, in the morning or so on Wednesday. And this was not without drama. It took Democrats three tries to pass the revenue, really read tax hike, part of the budget there. Republicans say that Democrats twisted the rules to get it done. Floor Leader Representative Patrick Windhorst was visibly upset. Let's watch.
I think it should be clear to everyone in this state what this supermajority is willing to do to ram a tax increase down the throats of the citizens of Illinois at 4:30 in the morning.
So, Rick, why did it take Democrats several tries? They have more than enough members.
It's an election year. Keep that in mind. Two, I think you're also starting to see, and I think in a variety of ways, not just with this revenue package, but even things involving Mayor Johnson and CPS and CTU about, yes, Democrats have more than 78 members there. One, not all of them showed up for this. This was a bifurcated session. The Senate had passed everything on Saturday, went home. Not necessarily a good idea to go home.
I think this also is a signal that we're entering different fiscal times than we've been in. The last 3 or 4 or 5 years, we had all the COVID relief money from Washington. We had a great piping economy. Well, we're now back to the economy's tighter, money's tighter. People still want to spend, so you got to make tough decisions.
There's no doubt about that. This was like a normal budget year.
Yeah, so this is a signal of what you'll expect more of this in years to come.
So now
it's going to get worse from here.
Well, it's not going to get better.
So now you'll get these kind of confrontations, and so yeah, the Democrats defied their own rules. You're only supposed to get 2 bites of the apple on the vote. Of course, when you've got all the votes, you bring it back for a third. You change the rules and make it a third. So, but I think it does reveal how, yes, there's the belt tightening is coming. Springfield does not have the oceans of cash via COVID anymore.
Which means, Becky, that Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, despite his ask for additional funding for schools, including, of course, CPS, didn't come through. What does this mean for CPS as a deficit is on the horizon for the district?
Right, and the deficit, we still aren't quite sure how they're going to close that deficit. They have been in a individual school budgeting process for the last 2 months, and that continued to, I thought it was actually interesting, they finally released the file that showed how every school's positions and budget was going to kind of shake out.
And how does it?
Yeah, and about 150 schools. We did an analysis. It's very difficult to look year over year because we're using a new formula. The school district is using a new formula, but Chalkbeat did an analysis looking at positions in on the current staffing file compared to the ones in this new budget file, and found about a little over 150 schools are going to see a reduction of positions by at least, a 0.5 position or more. Some schools seeing more than a dozen position reductions, others seeing, 5 or 6. And they're all across the board. They're in wealthier neighborhoods, poorer neighborhoods. Some are very full schools, some are more under-enrolled schools. Some of the biggest winners certainly are some of the schools that have been under-enrolled because the old formula worked in a way in which when you lost students, you lost money, and they're trying to reverse that downward spiral for some of those schools. So we are seeing a very mixed bag. Chicago Public Schools, like all school districts and our state government, is running out of the federal COVID money that really made things a little bit easier the last few years. And I think people have gotten used to that level, those levels of resources, and they don't want to let them go, and they want to find a way to preserve some of the good initiatives that were put in place, and that's causing some tough choices. So we did see that they did not provide more in Springfield, but Johnson did get a couple wins on 2 bills that were gonna maybe block his school board from making some changes. Harmon ultimately didn't call those onto the floor, and so those did not pass. And those, I think, were considered probably wins for his administration, for his team, but certainly the big funding one for CPS.
Anybody else want to weigh in terms of how Chicago fared?
Well, I'll just say on the bills that Becky's talking about, yes, for the mayor they were big wins, and for Don Harmon it's a big risk, because he's
You're
basically
talking about the
selective enrollment and protection
legislation
for 2 years until the entire school board is elected. And I mean, that passed with huge margins in the House. It was an embarrassment when Mayor Johnson was down there and Don Harmon, the Senate president, let that get through committee without on an agreed bill list.
And I'll just say, you want to see a good game in months to come, look at the negotiations for a new contract between Mayor Johnson's new school board and the Chicago Teachers Union, where the mayor used to work. Any number of things are of great interest.
Additional money from Springfield would have probably helped a lot in those contract negotiations, and it's not coming. Any other, Michael, for you, any big budget highlights? There's $58 billion. So there's so much to mention, but.
I think it's good, particularly when we think about DCFS and them getting adequate funding. Actually, with Cranes, I recently did a story looking at just the state of DCFS and how their funding can help children leave the foster care system and go on to live independent lives. And I think that was something Pritzker has been big behind, and also past DCFS looking at abortion rights. And with the budget itself, and then also Pritzker's efforts beyond the budget, when it comes to further emboldening Illinois as a state that can be a refuge. As in the wake of the repeal of Roe v. Wade, a lot of people are coming here.
Something he's really trying to make himself a national name for, in terms of Illinois as a haven for abortion rights. Right. And also, Rick, the grocery tax elimination, that's another one that, what is this? Is this going to make a difference to consumers' wallets, or is this just for
no, it's not going to make any difference. And here it is. It's a tax that is administered by the state, but local municipalities collect it. State says, okay, we're not going to administer it anymore. It's gone. Okay. In exchange, the local municipalities can just replace it. Guess what? They're just going to replace it.
So don't look for extra money.
And we're talking 1%. So, I mean, it's not
a buck on $100 of spending. Exactly. In about the minute that we have left, let's go to you, Greg. Another measure that didn't advance is funding for the Bears and the Sox as well. They're not just losing on the field. They lost in Springfield, too. What's next?
What's next is I'm looking for a plan B. I don't see one. The mayor's office, the Bears, the White Sox all say they're going to stick with what they're doing, but I see some little signs of stuff that's starting to happen. For instance, it's pretty well known in government circles that Jerry Reinsdorf, owner of the White Sox, is willing to put in a big chunk of money, $500 million, supposedly, but he hasn't said that publicly. And so until he does, it's not quite real, but it's that kind of thing that's going to be necessary to move this, because right now it's stuck. The notion of throwing money at billionaires, golly gee, in an election year isn't very popular.
I don't know if it's popular even outside of an election year, but we will see plenty of games to be played by Chicago sports teams and our politicians. With that, we are out of time. So our thanks to Rick Pearson, Michael Liptrot, Greg Hines, and to Becky Vivi. We are back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website. That's WTTW.com/news. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night on this gorgeous weekend. Unless you're maybe leaving Chicago, perhaps leaving out of O'Hare. Greg, you have been doing some reporting on how vital is really the expansion and construction at O'Hare?
Oh, it's critical of the whole basis of Chicago's economy. The reason we're here is because we're a transportation center. We have good connections, but our airport is old and outmoded, at least the terminals. They need to fix them. Everybody agrees that, but there's been this big food fight over who pays for it.
And further, Michael, that would mean construction means a nightmare. However, sometimes for those of us, is it worth it? Are you willing to put up with that for an improved experience flying out of the city or into it?
It's the question of delayed gratification, and it is something.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.